Scream is one of the most popular horror franchises of all time, a franchise which got revived last year and from that spawned another sequel, which is Scream 6, the whole reason why we're making this video. It was released last week, and after being busy with making other videos and wanting some time to reflect on it, we now have my ranking of all 6 Scream movies from worst to best. But before we get into it, please let me know what yours is down below. I'm eager to see. As far as horror franchises go, Scream is fairly consistent and never really fully dives into horrendous territory like most horror franchises do, but nonetheless, we're here to rank them and there has to be one at the bottom, so let's get started. I say it's fairly consistent, but I don't like Scream 3 all that much. To be fair to it, is on the quality of most horror sequels, so that can give it props, but it was easily my least favorite of this franchise. The meta nature of this franchise has always been charming. I didn't find that the case in this film, where I found it was quite dull and lazy with its explanations. There's always been a sort of suspension of disbelief with every single one of these films where you have to ignore tiny little faults in logic, and while that is required of you here, there are some big things which you just simply can't ignore. One being, how does this voice changing device even work? It's just ridiculous. This film was made in the year 2000 and we're still struggling to recreate an individual's voice to this day. It felt like such a lazy tactic to cut corners and get to places they wanted to be without having to think too hard about it, and it just made my experience a little bit miserable, to be honest. I felt like having Sydney's mum involved in the plot, both as a big part of the film's story and in ghost form, was an odd decision. I didn't think it entirely paid off. That combined with the reveal of Ghostface was very disappointing, so for me this was an easy last pick. While it is great to see actors from the original Scream trilogy return 10 years after the previous entry, this film doesn't exactly warrant their return as it doesn't cover any new ground. There are some enjoyable updated features so that they fit the modern day. One thing I really liked about this was the cold open Inception, but overall I just felt like this film was quite bland. The film struggles to kind of balance the old cast and the new ones, making for some inconsistencies with the tone. From a kills point of view, they're gorier, they're just overall better than the previous entry. You know, this film is fine, it has its moments, but overall I found it quite forgettable, especially for a film which returns 10 years after the original trilogy ended. The Ghostface reveals were quite solid, but as I mentioned, it just felt like we were repeating the same tricks for this film at the end of the day. I think I love you, so what am I so afraid of? The meta nature of this franchise is so charming and hilarious most of the time. I just love the self-awareness of this film when it came to being a sequel. It acknowledges that the sequel is rarely ever better than the original, and the kill count is always bigger, and that is the case for Scream 2. It feels like a natural continuation from the original Scream, where you have the survivors of that film just trying to move on with their lives, but the press from that event has come along with them on their journey. As much as I love the self-aware moments, there are points where it's very forced in and not as natural as it has been beforehand. But where this film does aim to be similar to the original, it can just straight up copy it with just a different location. Look, I've seen a lot of follow-ups to very successful horror films being absolute garbage, but this isn't the case for this one. I actually think it's quite solid for a horror film, and especially a horror comedy. It has some great moments, also some terrible ones. One being the killer's reveal, but the biggest sin of them all is this scene. So yeah, Scream 2 was a tad bit disappointing, but I was fairly satisfied with it for the most part, with that knowledge that horror sequels never really live up to their brilliant predecessors. Directly after I saw this film, this was in my second spot, but after taking a few days to think about it properly, here it is in third place. Scream 6 continues to take the franchise in a new direction by literally going into a new location, which is New York City, and it's just a fun environment for these Scream antics to play out. In terms of kills, you're treated to a whole bunch of them, with some of the goriest ones in the entire franchise. The tropes that have been set up in previous films have kind of had a special twist on them which makes you smile and laugh, which you have to give props for making a fresh, unique decision in a horror movie franchise which has gone on for this long. Scream 6 gives more development to these new characters whilst also having returning legacy ones, but I really do like how they focus on these new characters and are trying to rebrand the modern day Scream franchise with their faces on it. Obviously it sucks that Neve Campbell couldn't return. To be honest, I think it somewhat makes sense, and for this franchise to grow and continue being successful like it was, I think you need to let go of the legacy characters, not kill them off. There isn't a need to bring them in every time. But where this film is so desperate to set up these new characters to be the face of the franchise going forward, they feel invincible. You know, there's plenty of times where there's a lethal stab or something like that, and the character just kind of recovers miraculously, doesn't die. It did get quite annoying, to be honest, and took that tension away in many moments. I don't know whether it's just I've become a genius suddenly overnight, or if it actually is obvious, but I did predict the final killers, where it wasn't disappointing per se, but I just didn't find it that exciting because it just seemed so obvious. But nonetheless, I know many have loved the final twist, and there were certainly worse routes to go down with that. I'm really enjoying what Matt Bettinelli-Olpin and Tyler Gillette are doing with this new Scream franchise, or the continuation of it. I'm all on board for a Scream 7. This is probably my controversial pick of this video. It seems like I've been having a lot of those lately, but I feel like I enjoyed Scream 5 or Scream or 5 Cream a lot more than others did. It's always tricky to bring a franchise back, especially in the modern day. We've seen it successful with Halloween until it ultimately burned and crashed with its sequels after that. I think this franchise's meta comedy lends itself very well to reviving the franchise, and I think that they do an amazing job with that here. The Scream formula is updated to the modern day, with the main theme being requels. I love the acknowledgement of it and the way it plays off of that here. As mentioned in Scream 6, the new characters are very likable and charismatic, and you can't always say that for modern day horror films, especially ones attached to a franchise. The legacy characters return with maybe smaller roles than many had hoped, but I like the way they were utilized. While in the first 4 Scream movies there was always a bit of silliness and campiness with some of the kills, but here they feel like they have some very serious moments which just hit different. It just does feel like a darker Ghostface going forth with these modern day sequels, and I'm all here for it because I really enjoyed this film. But like in most horror rankings, the original is the #1 pick for me. It has aged phenomenally. You know, the comedy still holds up today, the twists, the turns, and even the horror elements are still tense to this day. It's just such a fun, good horror film, which hasn't always been the case. You know, you can have fun horror films with the expense of actually good storytelling, but here it nails both of them. I do wish I saw this when it first came out, because the context of this film is there hadn't really been a horror comedy like it around that time, so it was revolutionary, and still to this day many tried to be like it and many fail. It's not just a horror comedy, but it also is a celebration of horror in general, as it constantly acknowledges other horror films, whether that be Wes Craven's actual work or just the horror genre in general. As mentioned thoroughly in this video, the meta comedy makes this franchise, and the way they acknowledge certain cliches of the genre, it really does make it hard to predict what direction it's going to go in, because you're not sure if they're going to stick to those cliches or turn it on its head. So it's a very unique experience, and it feels like you're playing a little game with the film. Scream executes the idea of not knowing who to trust, because the killer can be anyone very well, and just nails so many things right with this film, making it #1 in my list and one of my favorite horror films of all time. So that is my ranking of all 6 Scream movies. Please let me know what your ranking is down below. As I mentioned, if you could like and subscribe as well, that would be much appreciated. After my long break away and scattered videos here and there, I'm finally back with multiple videos a week. But yeah, sorry if some of them have been late. There's been a bit of a backlog and been busy, so hopefully we can get through them now. But thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and I hope to see you in the next one.